Welcome everyone, and have a good time of the day. And we're currently starting our online live event on LinkedIn with invited speakers. And I currently would like to introduce our speakers and what we will be speaking about today. Today we will discuss how embargo on Russian fossil fuels, and especially on oil and gas, can end the war, Russian war in Ukraine. And we have brilliant speakers with us today who were dedicating most of their time in the year and almost a half for investigating Russian fossil fuel profits and to advocacy in between of fossil fuels conflict, peace and climate justice. So our first speaker is Mai Rosner. She's team lead and climate advocacy group Global Witness. And Isaac Levy, Europe-Russia policy and energy analyst, team lead at Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, CREA. Lori Miliverta, lead analyst at the Center of Research on Energy and Clean Air, CREA, and me, Svitlana Romanko. I am a founder and director at Razom. We stand Ukraine-based climate advocacy group, but also active internationally, and the successor of the Stand with Ukraine campaign, which committed to end global fossil fuel addictions that feeds Putin's war machine. And I just wanted to bring you more closer to the content we are experiencing now in Ukraine. Even in the midst of the summer, every hour day is similar because we are risking not wake up or wake up to another reality where 90% or even more of Russian targets in Ukraine are civilian infrastructure and civilians. And on the screen, you currently can see the tragedy that happened just yesterday in Konstantinivka in the Donetsk region, where 17 people were directly killed by Russian missile hitting the market in the city, and also 32 people injured. And unfortunately, there are no direct pictures that show you the bodies and the blood, but believe us, we experience every day hearing about loved one being killed or going to obligatory military trainings and defending our borders. And all of us are trying to do our best to bring the end to Russian fossil fuel war in Ukraine that has brought us to enormous humanitarian crisis, energy crisis, climate crisis, and the crisis of peace. On your right, you can see photos of Mariupol children attending the September 1st. It was not last year, it was 2 years ago. And for now, we don't even know if the children are alive. And every child in Ukraine is under the threat of attack. Unfortunately, the destruction to Ukraine has been enormous, has been huge. And there must be no place for conflicts and wars, especially fossil fuel, but every other conflict and war in the nearest future. I will just bring a few key numbers. So the total amount of direct damage to Ukraine's infrastructure, which just slightly leaving behind for 1 minute, the human and humanitarian component of it exceeded 1.50 billion of US dollars equivalent, and roughly 55 billion of euro is estimated environmental damage, including Kakhovka hydropower plant. And the third number is the energy infrastructure damage is estimated as 8.8 billion, including many millions in direct damage from Kakhovka and disability to access some clean energy sources as of now. So all these numbers are really depressing, and I would like to today to discuss and bring the very clear messages to the European Union officials and to Office of Foreign Assets Control from the US, who is in charge of enforcing sanctions directly, all economic sanctions against Russia, to countries of G20 to bring justice in place and also to follow the suit of the countries that are abandoning fossil fuels in order to deploy clean energies. And we have, let's go back to our amazing speakers for today's event, and I will introduce their bias to you. My short bias, I believe that you will be interested to listen to their findings and their year and a half outcomes of work. So Mai Rosner, as I said, she's team lead in climate advocacy group Global Witness, where she investigates and campaigns against conflict fossil fuels. Since the invasion of Ukraine, Mai has been researching links between the fossil fuel industry and the war, and researching extremely successfully. Isaac Levy is Europe-Russia Policy and Energy Analyst Team Lead at Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, CREA. Isaac tracks Russian fossil fuel export sanctions and the war implications for the energy transition. And Lori Mulivirta is lead analyst at Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, CREA. Lori has over 10 years of experience as an air pollution and climate expert and has led numerous research projects on air pollution, assessing air quality and health impacts of energy policies. I would like further to ask Isaac and Lori to share their findings in the presentation. And please listen to them. Their findings is extremely important. I will just remind our attendees and our listeners and our followers and supporters that this event has been live streamed and it's been recorded, and you will have full access to the session and to the speakers' presentations afterwards. We will share it openly, and we will hope that we will be heard further in the rooms and political decision makers which we demand decision from. To Isaac and Lori, if our audience will have any, Isaac and Lori, and if our audience will have any questions, just please ask them in LinkedIn chat, and we will ask our speakers, and we will provide you the very informative answers. To you, Isaac and Lori.
Thank you very much. I trust you can all see my slides at the moment.
Yes,
brilliant.
we can.
Great stuff. So I wanted to start with just a quick thank you to the organizers for inviting us along to this brilliant online panel discussion on how the embargo on Russian fossil fuels help end the war against Ukraine. And thank you all for attending. In our side of the presentation, we're going to briefly touch on how Russia's export earnings have changed since the invasion. Where is Russia selling its fossil fuels? The impacts of the sanctions, and touch specifically on the oil price cap policy not fully functioning, as well as touching on some other loopholes as well. So in this slide, we're highlighting Russia's fossil fuels and how they've changed since the invasion of Ukraine and after sanctions were imposed. Our data sets are used to produce charts like this and enable us to track Russia's daily fossil fuel exports. As seen in the chart on the right-hand side of this slide, Russia's export revenues rose following the invasion of Ukraine, driven by a spike in prices of fossil fuels. Since Ukraine's allies have implemented sanctions on Russia and the West have attempted to wean itself off Russian fossil fuels, they've been forced to increase sales to new willing buyers. In order to sell its fossil fuels to new partners, Russia was forced to offer discounts to them. The impact of the sanctions can be seen as the EU import ban on crude oil and respective price cap has lowered Russia's fossil fuel export earnings on their most important commodity, oil. Russia's fossil fuels are an essential source of finance for Putin in funding the war. In 2022, Russia earned $166 billion from the taxes on oil and gas sales, which is almost half of the budget and therefore a key enabler of their military aggression. Russia is more dependent than ever on earnings from its oil to fund the war, as their budget deficits rise to largest levels in the Russian ministry's dataset, which dates back to 2011. So this slide here is used to summarize where Russia is selling its fossil fuels by type, and this is starting since the implementation of the crude oil ban and corresponding price cap starting on the 5th of December. So as you can see in the slides, if we start with coal, most of the coal is sold to China, India, South Korea, and Turkey. For crude oil, which is the biggest fossil fuel export from Russia, India and China are the biggest buyers. LNG is purchased by the EU, specifically Belgium, Spain, and China as well, which will be one of the policy recommendations we are calling the EU to ban. LPG mostly goes to the EU and Turkey, although smaller in magnitude than some of the other fossil fuel exports. Turkey, China, and Saudi Arabia purchased the majority of Russia's oil refined products, and pipeline gas continues to flow into the EU, Turkey, and China in high values. In this slide, we're focusing on the most recent month of data, which shows that the EU imports of Russian fossil fuels have decreased 87% in August 2023 compared to the same month last year. It still remains the top 5 buyers. This shows the EU's reliance on Russia's fossil fuels to date, and that it's an important market for Russia. Exports of Russian seaborne oil increased 779% to India 1 year after the invasion compared to the prior year, and 56% to China when we look at volume terms, 2 of the biggest markets. These 2 countries still remain key buyers and have remained so since Russia invaded Ukraine. Turkey has been another key nation that has significantly increased its imports of Russian oil, mostly oil products, since the invasion. In this slide, I'm aiming to highlight the strong leverage of the oil price cap policy, showing how reliant Putin is on tankers owned or insured in price cap implementing countries to transport Russia's oil. Russia made an estimated 100 billion euros in export revenues of seaborne oil since the EU import bans and the price caps entered into force, with the majority of this oil still being carried on European owned or insured tankers. CREA's analysis shows that there are nowhere near enough shadow tankers to transport Russia's oil and circumvent the price cap. Traders are instead circumventing the price cap by obtaining fraudulent documents. The chart to the right-hand side shows the percentage of Russian oil that's carried on tankers owned or insured in the price cap implementing countries. As we can see, there's been a growth in the proportion of oil carried on shadow tankers, but this growth has been somewhat limited, and Russia is still very reliant on vessels under the price cap policy to transport its oil. The shares in August are about 50% for crude and 64% for oil products and chemicals. The policy has strong capabilities to reduce Russia's export revenues if, firstly, the price cap levels are lowered, which Larry's going to touch on, and secondly, enforced properly to reduce Russia's export earnings. Reported prices for Urals, which is the main grade of crude oil that Russia exports, rose above the price cap in April and have remained above the $60 barrel limit since July, as you can see in the chart on the right-hand side. EU and G7 owned and insured tankers, however, continued to lift Russian oil during these periods, indicating that enforcement of the oil price cap policy is not working. It has been apparent for months that enforcement of the price cap doesn't work in the Pacific trade from Russia's far eastern ports to China. In ports such as Kosmino, Russia's ESPO grade of oil is traded at prices above $60 per barrel and has done so for several years. Customs data from India and China indicates that buyers are paying prices well above the Urals benchmark, although still at a discount to Brent crude. So recent reports from India state that buyers over there have received smaller discounts in recent months than previously offered by Russian exporters, indicating the price cap is becoming less successful in forcing down the price of Russian exported oil, as Russia is slightly improving its ability to transport its oil without relying on G7 and EU owned or insured vessels. Failure in enforcement of the policy was an open invitation for Russia and OPEC Plus to continue to manipulate markets with supply cuts that have pushed up prices. The price cap coalition needs to retake the initiative from the Kremlin in dynamic game of sanctions. Otherwise, Putin will learn that the coalition will not follow its own policy and he can continue to manipulate markets. I'm going to talk on the price cap impact of lowering the levels down to $30 per barrel, but I'll pass over to Larry to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. So looking at what could have been, what would have happened if the price cap coalition got its act together, simply by enforcing the oil price caps at their current level, could have reduced Russia's revenues from seaborne oil by about 19%, and lowering the price cap to a level that would be more effective, that would be still significantly above Russia's production costs, so around $30 per barrel, could reduce those seaborne oil revenues by almost 50%. So there's a major tool here that could be used to eliminate Kremlin's taxable revenues. Also from the perspective of the concerns about the oil price and the oil market, it would be deflationary to lower the oil price. It would, as Isaac alluded, it would remove the incentive for Russia to manipulate the oil market the way that they currently are, and Russia's allies or in OPEC. So they would not, Russia would not be able to reap higher profits if its oil selling prices were effectively capped. Next slide, please. So here's a bit more of a thorough playbook for slashing Russia's export revenues. The stuff in blue is what has happened already, and the stuff in yellow. So you can see that compared with where we were last November, there's been a lot of progress already. But the current level of revenue is way too high, but seeing the current impact on the Russian economy, just imagine if all of this was done. So by far the most important further step that could be taken would be lowering the price cap to $30 for crude oil, banning gas imports that are still ongoing from Russia into the EU would be effective as well. And there is still pipeline oil coming into the EU as well, which is another meaningful step that could be taken. Next slide, please. And just to highlight on the previous slide that that Russia's revenues have followed our forecast quite closely. This is something that we put out when the sanctions were just entering into force. Recapping the ways in which the current energy sanctions are not working. So the oil price cap is set at a way too high level. There's a failure to enforce the cap, which Isaac talked about, and it's obvious that these two things have to be addressed together. So there's no point in lowering the level of the cap if you don't also fix enforcement. And the key reason why the US and many others are not keen to lower the level of the price cap is that if they did, it would become very apparent that enforcement is not working, and then they would have to fix that too. So you can't have either or. We need both of those. The third thing that we want to highlight is the loophole. So completely legal to import Russian crude oil into third countries, refine them into oil products, and then export those oil products into the EU, into Australia, into the US. So this is a roundabout way in which all of these key Ukrainian allies continue to import Russian crude oil. Next slide, please. This is significant. We've mapped this out. We've singled out 5 countries that act as these refining hubs, refining and re-exporting Russian crude oil. The biggest ones are India and the United Arab Emirates, followed by China, Turkey, and Singapore. And on the importing side, you can see that the EU is the largest importer of oil products refined in these third countries out of Russian crude oil, but United States, the UK, Australia, Japan, Canada all do this as well. So banning this trade is another effective step that can be taken. Next slide, please. So in a nutshell, what can be done? Obviously, the more we invest in clean energy, the easier it is to slash Russia's revenues and to take tough measures. There are still direct fossil fuel import flows from Russia to Europe that should be banned, obviously into Japan and other East Asian economies as well. And there are these indirect flows of refined oil. And then the potentially most impactful single one, lower the oil price cap and beef up the enforcement of the cap. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Isaac and Lori. And now the goes to Mai for her presentation.
Thank you, Svitlana, and thank you, Larry and Isaac, for your presentation. I'm going to be focusing on one kind of gaping hole in the embargo that Larry touched on, called the refining loophole. But before I get into it, I just wanted to share a bit about how my organization and my team came to work on this issue. Global Witness has a long history of conducting investigations into supply chains to expose the links between natural resources and conflict. And so when Russia invaded Ukraine, we assembled a team of data analysts and investigators and campaigners to expose what we already knew then, which was that this war, this brutal war on Ukraine, was being funded through the sale of coal and oil and gas worldwide. That's because Russia is a petrostate. 60% of their exports before the war were fossil fuels. That number has increased since the war began. And as a consequence, oil is by far Putin's most important export, and it is the primary way that this war is being funded. And so when we began the campaign, there were no sanctions on Russian oil. The US acted more quickly as a smaller buyer of Russian fossil fuels to institute an embargo, but the EU and the UK took a long time to match that action. And at the time, our job was primarily to expose the hypocrisy of Western governments funding a war that they were condemning. Since we've got the introduction of embargoes, we've been tracking the flow of Russian fossil fuels around the world and exposing loopholes in the sanctions. And that's where this refining loophole has become a real central way that Russia's oil industry has been able to continue working and has continued the flow of revenue to the Kremlin. And so as Larry described, what we've seen is this kind of eastward shift of Russian fossil fuel flows as European and UK embargoes kicked in. India and China and Turkey kind of massively stepped up their imports of Russian oil. And what they began doing is refining that oil into products like diesel and jet fuel and gasoline, which are now being exported to embargoing jurisdictions, creating a laundromat whereby Russian oil is kind of transformed and then legally imported into embargoing jurisdictions, which is preserving, this lifeline for the Kremlin and continuing revenue flows. There is a simple kind of solution to this problem, and it's one that my team has been advocating for, and we're making headway in the US and in the United Kingdom. Policymakers could ban the import of refined products from refineries that are running on Russian crude oil. And just to give you an idea of what our research shows this represents to the Kremlin, in the UK alone, 1 in every 20 UK flights is running on Russian oil. That's how what our research has shown. And in this year alone, those imports of refined products in tax revenue represent about 40 million pounds to the Kremlin. In the EU, that number will be far greater because, as Larry's slide showed, the EU imports far more refined products from these laundromat countries. In the US, our research shows that gasoline imports are still coming in from refineries that are running on Russian crude, meaning that despite all of the aid in weapons and financial support that the United States has shown Ukraine, drivers in the United States are still filling their cars with gasoline derived from Russian oil. So it's really imperative that this loophole be closed in order to put downward pressure on the Kremlin's revenues, in order to align the stated kind of intention of the embargo with an actual reality. And we're going to continue working to expose both the companies at the heart of this trade that are keeping the Russian oil trade alive, and also the governments, putting pressure on the governments to close the loophole to stop allowing the flow of Russian oil into embargoing countries disguised as other products. Thank you, and I'm going to pass over now to Svitlana.
Yes, thank you so much, Mai. And the next speaker for our event will be myself, and I will briefly introduce you a key important points we wanted to address the world leaders with before the G20 summit, which is happening starting from tomorrow in India, and also some other events that have been scheduled for this autumn, especially UN Climate Ambitious Summit happening in New York just in roughly 2 weeks. And also we wanted to bring our data and facts which prove that full and transparent and permanent ban for Russian fossil fuels is essential. It's a paramount to end this horrific war, which is extremely atrocious. And just being one Ukrainian during this event, and I know our partners, Isaac, Lori, and Mai, and many others collaborate with us since the war started, and we act all together. But actually, in a context, we can share a lot of the stories from the ground where people have not been able to survive the other day and woke up one morning to the horrific sound of massive explosions. Actually, we do have part of our team in Kyiv that are currently working on missiles attacks and shelling, and they spend their nights in bomb shelters. And also they are not quite sure if they can really wake up the other day, but they are very committed, with the youngest Ukrainian to the oldest, the most senior Ukrainian. Millions of us are very much committed to end the war, Russian imperialistic war against our country. And Razom, we stand as a campaign catalyst and, as I said, Ukrainian organization, but active internationally, and movement catalyzer, has been working since the war started under a few important dimensions. The first was cutting off Russian exports from fossil fuels, which is essential for peace and climate and justice all over the world, because we are not only those who are affected. Yes, we are mostly affected on the front line, but there are many other people in Africa and also in Latin America, in Asia, in North America, in Europe, who are suffering from horrific impact of climate crisis as extreme heat waves and also floods, and also fossil fuel expansion and the whole barrage of fossil fuel propaganda, which is to a big extent consist of a large amount of Russian propaganda and narratives that people are still consuming, not just being reflecting on a rational scale. Because we have all willpower, we have all resources and tools in place, just end this global fossil fuel addiction once and forever for everyone. We have a lot of political means, rule of law developed, UN rules, we have everything. We have acting political leaders which are organizing important political gatherings. They can sit offline and decide that yes, 12 sanction package must include full ban on Russian LNG, fossil gas, just because the future LNG export to the EU will likely exceed the volume of its pipeline gas export in the future. And over the last year, it exceeded 60%, when currently just currently when it's been just 8% before the war started. So we are witnessing the horrific impact of the war when the EU trying to get rid of Russian dependency of Russian pipeline fossil gas, just put themselves into the dependency on the other type of gas, which is LNG gas. And we expect that many Western companies will end their support for Russian companies, especially oil companies, but also coal companies, and also gas companies who are directly funding the military in Ukraine as Gazprom and many others. And these facts are clearly proven with many research and publications and so on. And now I see this event, public event, transparent event, because that's really important to speak to power, to speak to decision makers and make them listen to us. And I'm currently appealing to the President of the European Commission, who is Ursula von der Leyen, and to European Commissioner for Energy, Kadri Simpson, and for European Commissioner for Financial Stability, Financial Services and Capital Markets Union, Mairead McGuinness, and International Special Envoy for the Implementation of EU Sanctions, David O'Sullivan, to impose bold and full ban on Russian LNG gas within the 12 sanction package. Believe me, you will save, and not just me, but millions of Ukrainians, that you will save huge amount of lives, and you will make our children enjoy their life again. And because those children who were graduating this year, my son included, they were dancing beautiful Ukrainian dances with the flag, rolling the flag, full of hope, optimism, but they did not maybe realize in full that the country is in open war and our enemy is so attacking us, they're just hugely attacking us each day, and the Western countries are still bringing the enemy, Russia, and Putin, fossil fuel autocratic regime, terrorist regime, more weapons, more funds, more financial services, more infrastructure services. And I really doubt that our children will be able to study at the universities and colleges at their dream, because the only destiny they have ahead of them is just joining military on the front line and being killed by Russian soldiers. This is not the future I personally want for my children, and this is not the future that mothers of Ukraine want for all of them, of their children, for their husbands, for their relatives. And continuing this list, I could list all J20 countries and J7 countries as well, leaders that are quite hypocritic to impose the sanctions. And let's just talk about India first. And just this morning, we started morning with revealing information that India has funded the mostly Russian oil and coal trade worth of $6.2 billion of US dollars. And it's time for India actually to put their money where their mouth is. They say they are quite democratic country hosting the most democratic J20 summit, but the truth is that they're still funding Putin's war crimes and risking their citizens as well, because the fossil fuel autocrats are a huge threat, not just Ukrainians. It just started from Ukrainians. We are not obviously that lucky to have Russian imperialistic state bordering with us, but it could also expand, and who knows what happens if we won't stop the dictator. And also we called with a letter, and more than 33 organizations from all over the world, from different continents. And this amount is growing because organizations are still subscribing to our letters. We will share all links with you after our LinkedIn event, and you will be able also support and speak from people power perspective and support us, affected Ukrainians, into delivering our demand to a high profile politicians who are still feel brave enough to support the fossil fuel industries that over profiting on humans' deaths, and also on the war in Ukraine, but also conflicts in other parts of the world. Just being very clear, so we had a few demands within this letter. So actually, we called on all leaders of goodwill to end fossil fuel addiction once and for all, and it must be first released in the form of a full, transparent and bold ban on Russian fossil fuels. Not half measures, not just percentage of Russian oil that is flowing on the market. No, Russian oil is still flowing, and you must face this truth that while it's flowing, Russia gets profits, and the war won't be over, which threats all democracy and all the political regimes across the world. And I must also bring another point to that we are already winning. So it seems tough sometimes that when again Russian propaganda tries to convince us that no, Russia is not afraid of ban on fossil fuels, they feel strong enough and the economy is growing. No, that is not true. There are a lot of facts proving already, and independent research and data proving already that Russian economy is collapsing, inflation is huge. LNG Arctic, the second that must be stopped forever, is being postponed, and we still have time to stop it politically and within no supplying to infrastructure. And I believe we are. This demand is not still falling short. We still have time, critical time, to impose the full ban on Russian fossil fuels and get so much desired win politically. And if the world will get rid of one autocrat, the others will follow, because people don't like autocrats and just only fossil fuels, and fossil fuel lobby likes them. Anyone else is done because they threaten the human rights, the essential freedoms, the way we live, the cost of living crisis, everything, our climate crisis. And the sooner we can defeat fossil fuel autocracies, the better. And our call to action is, please put pressure on EU and call on EU commissioners and the important people I've mentioned today to impose the full ban on Russian fossil gas and LNG gas and Russian oil within the 12 sanction package. The second important demand is, again, J20 leaders must also, and J7 leaders who backslided on their commitments to get rid of Russian gas just recently, must be more intended to end the fossil fuel addiction that let us just really suffer from the war each day of our life while we are still alive and have a chance to speak. And also the third point is that today with partners from CREA and from Global Witness, we actually have slammed J7 for shelving its regular reviews of the Russian oil price cap scheme, even though most Russian crude is trading above the limit because of rises in global crude prices as well. And the solution is clear. The West must stop wasting billions and trillions subsidizing private fossil fuel companies and instead support the vital clean energy future we all know is needed. And they must do it this right now, and they must impose the ban on sanctions as well. But also they must, if just really making a demand to J20s that they must activate financial and climate action and put in place our commitment to phase out fossil fuels by 2030, because otherwise we won't be able to be on track with the Paris Agreement, which is another war and another catastrophe, the climate catastrophe. And ending with that, I just wanted to say that, just ending my speech and opening a round for questions, I wanted to end up that it's unprecedented how the world responded to the war, Russian war in Ukraine, and we've got huge support from many countries and many people and many organizations, and we are so grateful. But just a few more steps are needed, and can we just really make these steps firmly right now and put in right political decisions in place? And I've been asked just once, what do you think are the most powerful sanctions against Putin's autocratic regime? And I said, of course, sanctioning Russian fossil fuels, oil, gas, and also coal. But I also, came to my mind that important sanction on Russian fossil fuels is also huge deployment of renewable energies, of clean energies, as EU is currently doing, and the fossil fuel generation fell short and by 17% just recently. And people understand that we must reduce the consumption, and Europeans understand, and we have hope. So with that, I am opening round for questions, and let's check if we have those questions from our audience. Yes, we do. Thank you so much, our dear listeners and attendees who has asked us questions. And we will be I will currently read those questions. So the first one is, don't you have any information if initiatives you talk about are in working process of EU or G7? And yes, anyone who would like to take this question?
The final decision in the EU is always with the member states, and these bans have been proposed and prepared many times. It really comes down to what the heads of state are able to agree on in the EU, and that's why it's so important to keep highlighting this issue. In the G7, there was just reporting by Reuters that the G7 has decided to shelve the revisions, the periodic revisions of the oil price cap level, which they committed to when they introduced the price cap. So it's very clear that they haven't been able to agree, and now they have given up, and that's absurd, because it means that that you keep sending money to Russia that they then use to prolong the war, which of course causes immense suffering in Ukraine, as Svitlana has described, but also hurts the world economy and hurts the security of all of Europe and the world. So it's just inexcusable timidity, just or paralysis that we're seeing from the G7.
Yeah, thank you so much, Laurie. Mai, Isaac, would you like to add to that just briefly, or?
Yeah, thank you, Svitlana. I can offer a little bit of an update on where we stand on closing the refining loophole in the EU, UK, and US. In the United States, we are making advancements, and in fact, we submitted a bill that will close the refining loophole, which now has sponsorship in US Congress. So we are working with congressmen in the United States to get the administration, the Biden administration, to close the refining loophole through executive action. But in the absence of that action, we are also pursuing a bill through the House and Senate that would close the loophole through congressional action. In the United Kingdom, we've been in talks with a number of policymakers here who are very enthusiastic to stop the flow of Russian hydrocarbons to the UK, and are also working with us to close the refining loophole. In Europe, the issue is slightly less developed because of Europe's much higher dependence on refined products that are made from Russian oil. But we do know that it's on their radar because Josep Borrell, the EU's chief diplomat, recently referred to the Russian oil laundromat as a circumvention of sanctions. So there's no indication that they're taking action on this loophole as of yet, but we do know that they're aware it exists.
Yes, thank you so much, Mai. And the next question is, in your opinion, can the EU ban Russian gas sooner than declared? What do we need for this? I can actually start and pass to you. of course, the EU can, and they adopted Repower EU strategy, which is a good strategy to reduce consumption of fossil fuels, but they just need to be, European Commission and Council and Parliament as well, just really to be on track with the implementation and execution of this plan. But also we have identified at least two important research that proves that EU can get rid of its dependency on Russian gas much sooner than even 2028. IEA, first of all, proves that the consumption of Russian gas and gas in general will decline exponentially by 2030, but the pace of this decline is not sufficient as of now. But Bruegel, the think tank, has also commissioned a research where they proved in figures that this is fully possible to abandon Russian fossil gas by the end of 2024 and even sooner. So it means next year. And Europe must be moving fast to this commitment. And the key is reducing demand in fossil gas, which we can see already happening. And every European can contribute to that with the reduced consumption of fossil gas in heating homes, in lighting, and we still hope that we will ask and really receive this solidarity from Europeans, because you were amazing European people and other as well from the UK, US, and Africa, Latin America, Asia, from everywhere. You've been so amazing to support Ukraine. Just please keep going, keep supporting us, because we understand that the war is lasting slightly. We hoped it will end in 3 months, and we worked so hard to get it ended, but the fossil fuel industry can be dismantled in 3 months, but it can be dismantled in a few more months if there is a critical political power and also people power. So I would also, so we do have all means in place. And the other important research, just one sentence, because it's really important about investment. The EU, Repower EU foresees huge investments into clean energy, as it's just currently happening within the US. And this good trend must be expanded globally to the countries that suffer from developing and the affected country like Ukraine in the future. But still stating, as of now, we will Europe basically can save. Oxford research with Sunrise Project confirmed that Europe can save huge amount, 518 billions of euros equivalent to invest into clean energy could be saved by 2028 with reduced consumption of fossil gas. This is immense number, and of course the European authorities must make sure that there is the policies and politics are in place that will allow these huge investment savings and reinvestments into renewable energies. Thank you. Laurie, Isaac, would you like to add?
I don't mind coming in very briefly, if that's okay. Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. We've seen between January and July this year, the EU buying more than half of Russia's exports of gas, and there hasn't been a significant decrease on prior years. Capacity storage this year seems up to maybe 90%, so there is storage. And I think on top of that, I would highlight that the government needs to do more to provide incentives to reduce reliance on importing gas from Russia and kind of switching supplies, and obviously more importantly investing in renewable energy sources. But I'll stop there because I know Global Witness might have some views on this, or Larry too.
What Svitlana and Isaac didn't really speak to is pipeline gas, and so there the issue is that there are countries in Europe that are much more dependent on pipeline gas from Russia, and that requires solidarity in terms of using the existing gas network, increase existing storage capacity to ensure that those countries have sufficient supply. And that's not easy. It's doable, and it's much better to do it proactively than wait for Putin to do it at the worst moment.
Yes, thank you so much, Laurie. And we have 7 questions in total, and I just asked 2 of them. So our attendees, if you would like to hear responses, please stay with us slightly longer if you are available, and we will surely respond and take and respond those questions, because we are here for that and we are very keen to do this. So the third question is, what is the benefit of the oil price cap with an outright reinsurance ban from the UK and EU insurers, which dominate the market as originally adopted in the EU sanctions before being watered down to the price cap? Would you like to take on this, Laurie?
I'm not sure that I understood the question.
Yes. What is the benefit of the oil price cap? Why is
Right,
the
so,
yes,
okay.
an outright reinsurance ban from the UK and EU insurers, which dominate the market. So basically, I think it's just about these huge figures that most of shipments and transshipments are being insured within the UK-based companies. What would be in comparison more effective? As I understood, yes, it was originally adopted in the EU sanctions before watering down the price cap. What do you think?
Right. So the price cap, if it works right, will allow Russian oil to continue to make it to the market. So you don't have the largest supplier of oil exports cut off from the market, and you avoid the increase in global prices that would follow. So the background to this is that as Isaac explained, Russia continues to rely on European-owned and insured ships for the majority of its oil exports, and so if you simply banned these tankers from carrying Russian oil, it would have a dramatic impact on the global oil market. It's very hard to forecast whether the impact on Russia would be positive or negative, because you would have much lower export volumes from Russia, but you would have very high prices that they would be able to export as. Whereas if you do get the price cap policy running successfully, the supply is maintained, but Russia is forced to sell at a much lower price than the current market price, and that could effectively slash the revenues that Kremlin gets, that Russia gets, and especially the tax revenues derived by Kremlin, because the way that Russia's oil taxation policy is designed is they leave a fixed amount of money per barrel to the producers, around $25 per barrel on average, and the rest goes to Kremlin's coffers. So if you manage to lower the selling price close to $25, then there's no more excess revenue, excess profit that the Kremlin is able to tax.
Yeah, thank you, Laurie. And just to bring the alternative point, which I know also Mike can add on. So yeah, we are as the campaigners, especially our organization Razom, we stand since the very beginning, and the Stand with Ukraine campaign, supported with almost 900 organizations from 60 countries of the world. We were, and we still are, quite radical in demanding the full ban on Russia, because these understanding economics, but also we've been seeing very temporary effect of these oil prices spikes, which were mainly caused by artificial deficit, which is not true. So, and I truly believe if the Germany had enough of political willpower and brevity to impose, to lead on imposition of a full ban on Russian fossil fuels, we will already won the war as of now, and the world would be dramatically changed even much sooner. So this we still demand a full ban on Russian fossil fuels, and this is the only true we accept, because if the trade is zero, the profit is zero, and we've been also, it's a simple economic rule, and the other economic effect is temporary. And but yes, there is some brevity and political willpower which is needed for that, just to live through these few months of maybe lack of supply. But actually, IEA, International Energy Agency, has produced a plan, 10 steps, how to reduce the oil consumption. And none of the states, especially developed states, which are now refusing to fund their to pay for the climate destruction to all other countries, and they just did not imply this plan, and they are feeling well. It's these small 10 steps that could have been implied for during the year, and it would also reduce the consumption, but the consumption is not reduced, and this must be a first key point of action. Mai, would you like to add to that briefly, or just we are moving to other question?
I think in the interest of time, we can move to the next question. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And the fourth question is again, I believe that you will be the speaker answering this. So oil products in the EU go predominantly to the transport sector, where unlike the power and heating sector is having a much slower uptake of renewable energies. Is it a conscious choice not to mention oil use reduction measures, similar to the gas reduction measures agreed by the EU 27, also voluntarily?
I'll say that we use clean energy as a shorthand for both clean power sector investments and electrification. So switching to electric vehicles, switching to heat pumps in the heating sector, switching to electricity in industrial processes. So that's the way that clean power enables reductions in oil consumption as well. But it's a very good point of feedback that we should make that more explicit.
And Mai?
Yeah, it's a really good point that while we saw some really great successes in gas reduction, Europe, a good report recently came out from Transport for Europe, I think, that showed that Russian oil barrels were replaced nearly 1-for-1 with oil from other countries, which is a real missed opportunity, because what we saw with gas was that, you know, at the beginning there was all these doomsday predictions that Europe was going to freeze and we wouldn't make it through the winter, and that didn't turn out to be true. And at the same time, we saw a 20% reduction in Europeans' gas consumption. Finland, my favorite statistic, reduced gas consumption by 52% with no drop in industrial output. And so it shows that when there is a will to rapidly scale away from major existing sources of fossil energy, that there is a way to do it. And I believe that it was a very grave missed opportunity to not implement the same kind of demand reduction in transport and in oil use. And I hope that the European Union takes that more seriously moving forward, particularly now that we know that so much of the fuel being used by jets and cars is actually still derived from Russian oil.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lori and Mai. And now we have our approaching our fifth question. Do you know if Canadian banks are still invested in Russian fossil fuels? I just opened the website Putin's 100, where the most prominent and that must be ashamed financiers of the Putin war regime were listed. And what I can see, the Royal Bank of Canada are the ones who have been quiet about being divesting from Russian fossil fuels, but also there are a few more: the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board and Caisse du Dépôt and Placement du Québec. I don't know French, I'm sorry, but this is the three main financiers that have been listed within the Putin's 100 financiers so far. And there might be some pressure to put on them to ask them even publicly if they quit Russia with their funds or not. But we know for sure that North America is leading financial support for Russian fossil fuel infrastructure. The most of companies that provide infrastructure services and actually refinery and other services are based in the US, and we currently expect some business advisory with the Coalition Business for Ukraine, business advisory for fossil fuel, for companies that are acting in the area of fossil fuels to stop their activities in Russia and defund Russian fossil fuel industry, because without technology, Russian fossil fuel industry won't be able even to finish the Arctic LNG, the second project, which is huge. And also Yamal mega project, gas mega project will also stop, not even taking into account that it mainly includes of Russian-based and Russian national investors. And also, just to bring the other point, there are a lot of companies, and including Total Energies, that their shameful behaviors when they promise to leave Russia and they are not leaving Russia, and Wintershall Dea and others, it can't be explained even as losing some contracted money, because there is a moral and ethical side of the business, not just the financial side of the business. And if their money nationalized by Putin terrorist regime one day, as it already happened to a few companies, European-based companies, what will they say? Reputation lost and damage irreversible. So we're still making a call on these companies to stop their harmful activities in Russia and stop funding Russia's war crimes in Ukraine, because we just remind you, we have national list of sponsors of the war, which is officially run by our government, and these companies are in this list, and believe our government, we will hold those companies and officials and everyone accountable who is on this list when the appropriate rule of law will be in place and procedures within the International Criminal Court will be in place, and they will all sit in the GAG and they will respond inconvenient questions, and then they will pay lots more than they did as of now. This is my anticipated prognosis what happens next, because if we want hold Putin accountable and everyone else who funded war crimes in Ukraine accountable, we don't have a future as a humanity. And the rule of law, we may just forget about this principle, about UN. And actually, it's a very good chance to ask UN before the UN Climate Ambitious Summit, what do they think about sanctioning Russian fossil fuel industries themselves, and speaking clearly what should be done next regarding Russia's holding Russia accountable within the UN international authorities. Because I am deeply troubled with the issue that Russia has been among the 3 largest financiers of UN before 2020. Just the data are from 2021, before the war started, but we actually would like to see the much more bold actions from the UN that we are currently seeing, including not allowing, just really developing international procedures to put accountability on the war criminals. Just a reminder, over 90,000 of war crimes have been registered within the Ukraine, and many of them has not been yet registered even. So just please be mindful that this number is huge, as this number is growing, and Russia will really be held accountable, and no money can just really justify. They will pay to the end of their lives, but which I believe will be really short. And many nations will liberate from Russia's oppression, and Ukraine included, and we will defeat the regime. Next question is, actually, we still have two more left. Sixth question is, what are the alternative? Just let me please check on it. What are the alternatives to the Russian fossil fuel resources that may be offered to the importers as alternative in order to create some level of certainty for yet premature oil and gas importing markets? Who would like to answer this?
That's if you start to dig into the details, it's a big question. But so in short, if you look at what Europe has done, which we've already talked about, the increase in power generation, especially from solar power, the increase in heat pumps have been the most important measures on the energy production side, and then on the demand side, energy consumption reduction has given the space to implement some of these bans, however imperfect. But so because, well, obviously we should have acted on this 10 years ago, but since we didn't, now it has to be a combination of those short-term measures that can reduce consumption so that we can implement these bans immediately, and then at the same time invest in the clean power generation and in those electrification measures that can supply all of the fossil fuel, all of the energy without relying on fossil fuels that we're currently importing from Russia.
Yes, thank you so much, Laurie. And our last question for today, which is about Russian propaganda, and so I will read it in full. It's quite interesting, and let's end with this point. Russian propaganda often claims that it's the EU countries who will be hit hardest by the fossil fuel embargo. Even so, those statements are not even half true. Thank you for stating on that. I wonder what the potential practical risks and externalities LNG and pipeline gas embargo entails for the EU. And for instance, Sweden isn't much dependent on Russian imports, but still uses the resources to produce fertilizers for agriculture, and Germany needs it for heavy industries. So I can start that really essential is to debunk the Russian propaganda every time we see it. And it's really essential that positiveness of the renewable energy revolution, clean energy revolution that is already happening in enormous scale across the countries of the world, worth appreciation and worth being acknowledged as well as across the EU countries. So they made a significant change just in a year and a half in their fossil fuel consumption, and I believe they have a prominent renewable energy future. And as a the third, what we are doing, just to bring it, we want to rebuild Ukraine on completely clean energy model and make it a global model for clean energy transition, because half of country is destroyed, and over 50% of energy infrastructure is also being hardly damaged or even destroyed as well. So this is a chance. Yes, this is just really a tragedy, but it also a chance for us to start living other lives that we did before, and make a transition for our internal model inside of Ukraine, and then spread it globally and catalyze the clean energy revolution. But we are very mindful that first we must end the war and defeat Putin and Russia, and for that purpose, we believe that embargo is essential on Russian fossil fuels, oil and fossil gas and LNG gas. And these statements are not true. I am saying as Ukraine is very much relying on the EU within the European Green Deal commitments and the policies, which we hopeful as a country candidate to the European Union to implement in the nearest future, regardless of war. We believe that this impact is exacerbated, and it's not as it seems, and it's been discussed by Russian propaganda. And fertilizers and also petrochemicals, yes, it's one of the critical points where a ban should also be imposed on Russia, because it's one of largest leading importers of fertilizers themselves even. But of course, we know that for their production, fossil gas is much needed, and for heavy industries. But we believe that also banning fertilizers and petrochemicals from Russia, along with gas, might make a huge change. Yes, to anyone else who would like to add to that?
I'll just say that got into a lot of the very hard things that we have to solve to be completely rid of the dependence on fossil fuels, but we don't need to solve all of those things to stop the dependence on Russian fossil fuels, which at most made up 50% of our consumption before the invasion. So it's just important to be clear about that. So we do need to eventually eliminate all fossil fuels, but it's quite a lot easier than that to completely eliminate dependence on Russia on this issue.
Okay.
If I can just add one last point, yes, I think that's totally true. And just with the addition to put encouragement and support to other governments to join in the EU and other countries, allies of Ukraine, support to stop buying Russian fossil fuels and meeting the demand that the EU previously supplied to Russia.
Thank you so much, Isaac. And Mai, your final conclusion remark, and we will be ending our LinkedIn event and we will share the links how to stay in touch with us.
Thank you, Svitlana, and thanks to the other panelists who we've worked with for a long time on this issue. I would just say that we are in a critical moment, both in ending this war and also in our fight against climate change. And we do have a real opportunity, as Svitlana already said, to not only end Russian fossil fuels, which will accelerate an end to this war, but also to end our dependence on all fossil fuels that are currently destroying the planet. And those two intertwining crises have the same source, which is this dependence on fossil generated energy. And the sooner that we can get off Russian energy, the sooner we can get off all fossil fuels. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Mai, Isaac, and Lori. These were beautiful words which we believe will come true in the nearest future. And thank you so much for your incredible work and your incredible partnership within and regarding fighting fossil fuel addiction in Russia, but also globally, because the thing we would like to do, as Mai pointed out, it's absolutely correct. By defeating one fossil fuel autocrat as Putin, we would like to start a global movement which will be fighting again and winning and defeating the fossil fuel dictators and lobbyists, and escalating a clean energy revolution across the world when people will own the energy, but not the fossil fuel companies. And these fossil fuel conflicts will be completely eliminated and climate crisis tackled in full. With that said, we thank you so much to everyone who has spent this hour and almost 15 minutes of your time today on Thursday to listen to us, to our brilliant experts. And please stay in touch with us. We will be sharing in comments links to our resources to our partners' websites, to the important research and the contact emails where you can get in touch if you would like to. Please join our call for LNG ban on 12 sanction package and also J20 ban, J20 financial commitments and phasing out global fossil fuel addiction and supporting the full and transparent sanctions on oil, crude oil, refined oil products, and also closing loopholes in sanctions and fossil fuel gas ban in the EU, UK, US, and also other countries, and Mexico and Argentina that has not imposed sanctions so far, and in many other countries. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to spend this time with you today. Have a wonderful rest of the day.